please subscribe and comment below. If you liked the video, please indicate and share with your friends.
I think that is very important. Now, what do you do in this environment when you look at the way people distrust the police now? In particular, I mean, I've been reading stories about cops going to Five Guys Burgers and they can't get served because people won't serve cops. And this idea that all cops are bad. And this is a very, really disturbing perspective to me, because you're seeing what's happening right now in Chicago. You're seeing what's happening right now in New York, where you have this massive uptick in violent crime because it's perceived that the police presence has been diminished greatly. So how do you reaffirm the trust in law enforcement, and what do you do to reform law enforcement? Because clearly there are some people that are cops that should not be cops.
Yes, there are a few things that you can do right off the bat and that people right, left, and center have sort of talked about. And one of them is that you can abridge qualified immunity in certain areas. So qualified immunity is the idea that you're not liable to civil suit if you don't do something bad that has specifically had a precedent in law. So you could do something bad, but as long as nobody else has done the same exact bad thing before, you're not subjected to civil liability. You could curb that.
Explain that again?
It's a little complicated. So qualified immunity generally means that if I do something bad, then as a police officer, if I act within the scope of my general reasonable authority, you can't sue me for it. The actual way
that you do something bad, what if you shoot somebody while you're operating?
So the reason that qualified immunity, as currently understood under Supreme Court doctrine, is too broad is because that the standard used to be you would have to act as a reasonable police officer. If you acted as a reasonable police officer and you took a reasonable action, right? Somebody went for their waistband, they had an object in there, you didn't know if it was a gun, you shot them, right? You wouldn't presumably be suable because that's still reasonable. You track a guy down, you shoot him in the back, and then you plant a gun on him, that presumably would be suable, right? He'd be personally liable.
I understand what you're
so
saying.
The way that Supreme Court has done this is they broaden qualified immunity to such an extent that you can still, bottom line is you can still get away with some bad stuff and not be sued for it. So that needs to be curbed. That's one thing. Second, police union contracts need to be utterly redone across the country. Police union contracts right now protect a lot of bad cops, right? But because the police unions are designed to protect the members of the union, just like any other union.
Yeah.
And so what that means is that police unions, I'm not a fan of public sector unions generally, but police unions need to be abridged in their ability to protect cops who do something wrong. Third, you need to have a national registry of cops who are disciplined for violation of procedure so that they can't just leave LAPD and then go work for Ferguson PD.
Right.
Qualified immunity is a defense that allows government officials to escape civil lawsuits involving violations of individuals' constitutional rights. Qualified immunity stops individuals who've had their homes, vehicles, or in many cases, their bodies damaged by government employees from being reimbursed for the damage done. How can individuals overcome qualified immunity and get their day in court? They must show that the violated right is clearly established. That means finding a previous case where a court ruled that officials violated someone else's rights in almost the exact same way. For example, a police officer who sicked his dog on a surrendering suspect was given qualified immunity because the suspect was sitting down with his hands up rather than lying down. But qualified immunity doesn't just shield officers, it shields all government workers, including elected politicians, inspectors, and IRS agents, allowing them to have a case against them dismissed before it is considered by a jury. For instance, last year a court granted qualified immunity to members of a medical board who unconstitutionally searched a doctor's confidential client files without a warrant. Proponents of ending qualified immunity say it protects officials' bad behavior. On the other side, qualified immunity defenders say that it prevents officers and other government agents from being bankrupted over a reasonable split-second decision. But would ending qualified immunity open the floodgates for spurious lawsuits? The answer is an unequivocal no. Abolishing qualified immunity would not end the ability for officers and officials to argue that they behaved reasonably when making a split-second decision. That protection is built into the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. There are several procedural rules specifically designed against meritless lawsuits. If you can't show that the officer's use of force was unreasonable, your suit will be thrown out, without the officer invoking qualified immunity. Moreover, officials almost never personally pay when they are on the losing side of a civil rights lawsuit. One study showed that the government paid 99.8% of the time. When people who swore to uphold the Constitution break their oath and abuse their power, courts are supposed to protect individuals. But qualified immunity and other doctrines prevent officials from being held accountable. That's why the Institute for Justice created the Project on Immunity and Accountability. If we must follow the law, then the government must follow the Constitution.
Emily Nimps takes it one day at a time.
We are the silent majority, but I believe that we need to speak up and use our voices for our law enforcement officers.
Her husband, Benjamin, was killed in a crash July the 21st, 2019, while serving in law enforcement in Florida. He planned on moving to Indiana to join Emily and their 2 children. Now Emily has become an advocate for families and those in public safety.
They go out daily knowing that they're going to see things that they're going to carry with them for the rest of their lives, and they do that for the love of their community.
We spoke to Emily and Greg Pitts on Zoom. Greg's brother, Rob, was a police officer in Terre Haute, killed in the line of duty on May the 4th, 2018.
We need to stand up and have a voice for our officers.
Both Greg and Emily condemn what happened to George Floyd in Minnesota. Both oppose the call to drop the qualified immunity, which protects officers from certain lawsuits.
I realize that with any occupation, you're going to have 1 or 2 bad apples here and there, but you can't deem a whole profession by just what a few people do. And the good officers out there that are doing their jobs every day, you know, they don't agree with what these bad officers are doing.
Whether you want to call it a reform or a modification, however you want to say it, you are taking away the officers' ability to properly and safely do their jobs, and not just that, their families. You are now asking them to risk the livelihoods of their families at home.
The Lafayette police chief wants to see more research on the impact of any potential changes to qualified immunity before there's a rush to judgment.
I read a meme the other day that's very accurate. It said, if you have 130 good cops and 12 cops, or 12 cops that are bad, you have 12 bad cops. If you have 130 good cops and 12 bad cops, but the 130 won't do anything about the 12 bad cops, you've got 142 bad cops.
Yeah, and I think that that's right.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching, and vote thumbs up or thumbs down and tell me in the comments why.